Sometimes it's the smallest things that end up pulling back the curtain on a person's entire character. You think you know someone. You think you've shared enough late night conversations, enough quiet dinners, and enough vulnerable moments to understand the fundamental way their brain works. But then a single moment happens, a moment so seemingly trivial and yet so deeply unsettling that you're left staring at them like they're a complete stranger. That's where I am right now. My name is Maya. I'm 20 years old, and I'm currently sitting in my mother's apartment staring at my phone and wondering if the person I've been dating for the last year is actually the person I thought he was, or if I've been ignoring a very strange, very gross reality this whole time. To understand how I got to this point, you have to understand my living situation. I live in my mom's apartment in the city. It's a beautiful place, a bit older but with high ceilings and those large windows that let in the amber glow of the streetlights at night. My mom travels a lot for work. She's a consultant, so she's only actually here every few months or so. Most of the time, it's just me. It's a weirdly solitary existence for a 20-year-old living in a space that feels like a grown-up's home while I'm still trying to figure out how to be an adult myself. I keep the place spotless. Maybe it's a way of feeling like I have control over my life, or maybe it's just because my mom is a bit of a perfectionist and I've inherited that trait. I'm the kind of person who has a specific place for everything. I'm especially conscious of hygiene. I wouldn't call myself a full-blown germaphobe, but I definitely have my boundaries. I like my space clean, my sheets fresh, and my personal items private. Then there's my boyfriend Leo. He's 21, a year older than me, and he lives in a university dorm on the other side of town. If you've ever been in a college dorm, you know exactly what that's like. It's loud, it's cramped, and it's usually at least a little bit sticky. So naturally, Leo spends a lot of time here. At first, it was just weekend visits. Then it turned into a few nights a week. I didn't mind it. In fact, I love the company. The apartment can feel cavernous when it's just me and the hum of the refrigerator. Having Leo here made it feel more like a home. We'd cook together, watch movies, and just exist in each other's orbit. He's charming, he's funny, and up until yesterday, I thought we were completely on the same page about pretty much everything. Yesterday started out like any other day. Leo had come over in the afternoon. We spent the day lounging around talking about our classes and what we wanted to do for dinner. The plan was always clear. He would stay for the evening, we'd have a nice meal, and then he would head back to his dorm. I had a really early shift at work the next morning, the kind where you have to be out the door before the sun even thinks about coming up, and I'm the type of person who needs a solid night's of sleep and a very specific morning routine to function. Leo knew this. We had talked about it earlier in the day. I'll head out around 9, he had said, so you can get your beauty sleep. I appreciated that. It felt like he respected my time and my needs. But as the evening wore on, the atmosphere started to shift. We were sitting on the sofa, the credits of a movie rolling silently on the screen, and I noticed Leo wasn't making any moves to get his things together. I glanced at the clock on the microwave. It was already 9:15 p.m. I leaned over and nudged him gently. Hey babe, it's getting late. Don't you have that long trek back to the dorms? Leo groaned, sinking deeper into the cushions. He looked at me with those puppy dog eyes that usually work on me. Ugh, I really don't feel like leaving Maya. It's so cozy here. My dorm is going to be freezing, and my roommate is probably playing video games with his headset on, yelling at the screen. I laughed, but I stayed firm. I know. But I have to be up at 5 a.m. If you stay, we'll just stay up talking, and I'll be a zombie tomorrow. Plus, you don't even have your stuff here. That was the moment the evening took a turn into the twilight zone. Instead of nodding and getting up, Leo just looked at me and shrugged. I could just sleep over, he said casually. It's not a big deal. I'll just wake up when you do and leave then. Leo, you don't have your toothbrush, I reminded him, thinking that would be the end of it. To me, that's a non-negotiable. You don't stay over if you can't brush your teeth. It's basic human hygiene. I expected him to realize he'd forgotten his overnight bag and finally head out. Instead, he just stared at me for a second, a mischievous little grin playing on his lips. I could just use yours, he said. I felt a literal shiver of revulsion go down my spine. I laughed, thinking he was joking. Ew, no way. You know how I am about that stuff? Bacteria, Leo? That's gross. I've told him before that I'm super conscious about things like that. To me, a toothbrush is the most personal item a person can own. It's literally designed to scrub the waste out of your mouth. The idea of sharing one, even with someone I kiss, is just fundamentally wrong to me. There are different types of bacteria in everyone's mouth, and I don't want his in my bristles. I thought he was just teasing me, trying to get a rise out of me because he knows I'm a bit particular, but he didn't laugh back. He just tilted his head. What's the big deal? We kiss all the time. It's basically the same thing. It is not the same thing, I said, my voice rising a little. Kissing is kissing. A toothbrush is a tool that removes plaque and food particles. It's a health thing, Leo. It's actually really unhygienic to share them. He rolled his eyes, letting out a frustrated sigh as if I were the one being difficult. You're being so dramatic, Maya. It's just a brush. But fine, if you're going to be weird about yours, I'll just use your mom's. I froze. I actually felt the blood drain from my face. My mom's toothbrush. The one sitting in the holder in the guest bathroom. The one she hadn't touched in weeks because she was currently in another time zone. What? I whispered, hoping I had misheard him. Yeah, Leo said, sounding completely rational as if he were explaining a simple math problem to a child. Your mom hasn't been here in a few weeks, right? So any bacteria on her toothbrush would be dead by now. It's basically a clean brush. I'll just rinse it off. Problem solved. I sat there looking at him, waiting for the punchline. I waited for him to burst out laughing and tell me he was just trying to see how far he could push me. But the punchline never came. He was serious. He genuinely believed that because my mother hadn't used her toothbrush in a while, it was now communal property purified by the passage of time. I felt a wave of nausea. The logic was so skewed, so fundamentally disgusting that I didn't even know where to start. Leo, I said, my voice trembling slightly. That is so much worse. That's my mom's. And no, the bacteria doesn't just die like that. There's dust, there's bathroom air, and it's her personal item. How can you even think that's okay? He looked at me with genuine confusion, and that was the scariest part. He wasn't trying to be gross. He truly didn't see the problem. Maya, you're overthinking it. It's just plastic and bristles. It's not like she's using it right now. Why are you making this such a huge thing? At that moment, the cozy, warm feeling of the apartment vanished. It felt cold, and suddenly the man sitting on the sofa next to me felt like a stranger with a very disturbing lack of boundaries. The silence that followed his suggestion was heavy thick with a kind of disbelief that I couldn't quite put into words. I sat there, my hands gripped tightly in my lap, looking at Leo as if he had just suggested we start a fire in the middle of the living room rug. It wasn't just the suggestion itself, though. Let's be honest. The idea of using my mother's toothbrush was stomach-turning. It was the casual, effortless way he had said it, as if it were a perfectly logical solution to a minor inconvenience. Leo, I said, my voice coming out strained, that is a person's private personal hygiene tool. It's not a spare set of keys. It's not a borrowed hoodie. It's a toothbrush. It goes inside your mouth, and it belongs to my mother. He leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest, his expression shifting from confusion to a sort of mild annoyance. I know whose it is, Maya. I'm not saying I'm going to keep it. I'm saying for one night, because I'm tired and I want to stay here with you, it shouldn't be a big deal. You're acting like I'm asking to use her surgical equipment or something. It's been sitting in a holder for 3 weeks. Anything that was on it is long gone. Science, Maya. Think about it. Science! I repeated, my voice rising an octave. What science? Where did you get the idea that bacteria just vanishes after a few weeks? And even if it did, which I highly doubt, it's the principle, it's the boundary. That's my mom's space. This is her home. I am a guest here just as much as you are in a way, and I would never ever dream of touching her personal things like that. It's disrespectful. It's violating. He let out a short, sharp laugh, the kind that makes you feel like you're being mocked for having a soul. Violating, Maya, come on. You're being way too sensitive. It's a piece of plastic. She's not even here. She'll never know. I'll rinse it, use it for 30 seconds, rinse it again, and put it back exactly where I found it. It's a victimless crime. I felt a flash of genuine anger then. It wasn't just about the toothbrush anymore. It was about the fact that he was dismissive of my boundaries and, by extension, my mother's. I grew up in a household where privacy was paramount. You didn't go through people's drawers, you didn't read their mail, and you certainly didn't use their toothbrushes. To me, the bathroom was a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the most private parts of your life were kept. The thought of Leo standing over the sink in the guest bathroom, scrubbing his teeth with my mother's brush, made my skin crawl. It felt like a betrayal of the trust my mom placed in me by letting me stay here. I don't care if she never knows, I said, my voice low and firm now. I know. And I'm telling you no, I'm not being dramatic, and I'm not overthinking it. I am telling you that I am uncomfortable with it, and as my boyfriend, you should respect that without me having to write a thesis on why it's gross. Leo sighed, a long, exaggerated sound that filled the quiet room. He stood up, but he didn't start gathering his things. Instead, he paced the length of the living room, his footsteps muffled by the thick rug. Fine, whatever. I won't use the sacred toothbrush, but can I stay? I don't know, I'll rinse with some mouthwash or something, or I just won't brush tonight. It's one night, my teeth won't fall out. I looked at him, and for the first time in our relationship, I felt a flicker of genuine exhaustion. Not the kind of exhaustion that comes from a long day at work, but the kind that comes from realizing you're speaking a different language than the person you're with. Leo, no, you're missing the point. It's 9:30 now, I have to be up in 7 hours. If you stay, we're going to be in bed, you're going to want to talk, or you're going to be tossing and turning because you're not in your own bed. I need to sleep. I told you this afternoon that tonight was an early night for me. Why is this becoming a negotiation? He stopped pacing and looked at me, his face softening slightly, but there was still a stubborn glint in his eyes. Because I want to be with you, Maya. Is that so bad I'd rather be tired and with you than alone in that shitty dorm room? I thought you'd want the same. That was the hook, the guilt trip. It was a subtle move, one he'd used before framing his refusal to respect a boundary as an act of love. Normally it worked. Normally I'd melt and say, oh, okay, just this once. But tonight, the toothbrush incident had created a wall between us. I couldn't unhear what he had said. I couldn't unsee the casual disregard for hygiene and personal space. I do want to be with you, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. But I also need to be a functional human being tomorrow. And honestly, Leo, I'm a little weirded out right now. The whole toothbrush thing, it's left a bad taste in my mouth, ironically. I think it's better if you just head back tonight. We can hang out tomorrow after I get off work. The atmosphere turned icy. Leo didn't say anything for a long moment. He just stared at me, his jaw set. Then without a word, he walked over to the armchair, grabbed his jacket, and shoved his arms into the sleeves. He moved with a kind of jerky, aggressive energy that made me feel like I was the one who had done something wrong. "Fine," he snapped. "I'm going. God, I didn't realize I was dating a germaphobe who values her mom's old toothbrush more than her boyfriend's company." "That's not fair, Leo, and you know it," I said, standing up to follow him to the door. "It's about respect, it's about hygiene, it's about a million things that aren't valuing plastic over you." He didn't listen. He was already at the front door pulling his sneakers on without unlacing them, crushing the heels down. He looked up at me and his expression was one of pure, unadulterated annoyance. "I'll see you later, Maya. Have a great sterile sleep." He slammed the door not so hard that it would wake the neighbors, but hard enough to make the frames on the wall rattle. I stood in the hallway for a long time listening to the sound of the elevator arriving and then descending. The silence that rushed back into the apartment felt different than it had an hour ago. It didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt heavy and laden with questions I wasn't sure I wanted to answer. I walked into the bathroom, my bathroom, and looked at my own toothbrush sitting innocently in its holder. I felt a sudden irrational urge to move it to hide it, even though he was gone. I went into the guest bathroom and looked at my mother's toothbrush. It was a simple blue and white reach brush. It looked exactly like it had for the last month, but now it felt like an object of contention. I imagined him reaching for it. I imagined him thinking he was cleaning it by running it under hot water. I couldn't stop thinking about his logic. The bacteria has died. Where does a 21-year-old man get that idea? I'm a student. I like facts. I like evidence. So naturally, I did what anyone in my position would do. I went to the kitchen, made a cup of tea I didn't really want, and pulled out my laptop. I needed to know if I was actually being dramatic or if he was as fundamentally wrong as I felt he was. I started Googling, how long does bacteria live on a toothbrush? Can you share a toothbrush with a family member? Risks of using an old toothbrush. The results were immediate and frankly terrifying. I found articles from the American Dental Association, from university health departments, and from renowned dental clinics. They all said the same thing. Toothbrushes are a breeding ground for Staphylococci, coliform bacteria, yeast, and even fecal coliforms if the bathroom isn't properly ventilated or if the toilet is flushed with the lid up. And as for the bacteria dying off, some viruses and bacteria can survive for weeks in the moist environment of brush bristles. Even if the brush feels dry, the microscopic world living within it is far from dead. I felt a sense of vindication, but also a growing sense of dread. If he was this wrong about something so basic, what else was he wrong about? I decided to send him the links. Not to be petty, okay, maybe a little bit to be petty, but because I genuinely wanted him to see that my drama was based in reality. I wanted him to understand that I wasn't just making up rules to be difficult. I copied 3 of the most reputable links and sent them to him with a short message. I wasn't trying to be mean earlier, I just really care about this stuff. Please read these so you understand where I'm coming from. It's not just plastic, it's a health thing. See you tomorrow. I put my phone down and tried to settle into bed, but my mind was racing. I kept picturing his face when he called me dramatic. I kept thinking about how he dismissed my mom's privacy. I finally drifted off into a fitful sleep, only to be woken up an hour later by the sharp ping of a text notification. I reached for my phone, squinting against the brightness of the screen. It was Leo. These are all sponsored articles by dental clinics and stuff, Maya. Of course, they want you to buy new brushes and be paranoid. You can't trust everything you read on the internet. You're being brainwashed by Big Dental. Go to sleep. I stared at the screen, my heart sinking. Big Dental. Was he serious? He was actually doubling down? He was dismissing scientific consensus as a conspiracy theory just so he wouldn't have to admit that wanting to use my mom's toothbrush was gross. The 5 a.m. alarm felt like a physical blow. I groaned, rolling over and squinting at the glowing numbers on my phone. The screen was still showing Leo's last text about Big Dental. Even in my sleep-deprived fog, the phrase felt like a hallucination. I rubbed my eyes trying to clear the grit from them, but the image of his words stayed burned into my mind. I lay there for a few minutes, the apartment silent around me, the pre-dawn light just beginning to gray the edges of the curtains. Usually this was my favorite time of day, the quiet, the stillness, the feeling of having the world to myself before the city woke up. But today, the silence felt heavy. It felt like a reminder of the argument that had happened right here just hours ago. I forced myself out of bed, my feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. I walked into the kitchen to start the coffee maker, the familiar mechanical whirring providing a small bit of comfort. As the scent of roasted beans filled the air, I found my gaze drifting toward the guest bathroom door. I hadn't even gone in there since Leo left, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I felt a weird, intrusive urge to go in and check the toothbrush holder, just to make sure he hadn't snuck in and used it anyway, before he stormed out. I knew that was paranoid. Leo wasn't a liar, at least not that I knew of. But the fact that I even felt the need to check was a sign of how much my trust had been rattled. I walked into the guest bathroom, my heart fluttering nervously. I looked at the blue and white toothbrush. It was dry. It was exactly where it was supposed to be. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, feeling a momentary wave of relief, followed immediately by a wave of guilt. Why was I acting like a detective in my own home? Why was I suddenly suspicious of the person I was supposed to love? Because he made it weird, I told myself. He made it gross, and then he made me feel like I was the crazy one for thinking it was gross. I got ready for work in a daze. Every time I picked up my own toothbrush, I thought about his mouth. I thought about the bacteria. I thought about the big dental comment and actually let out a dry, humorless laugh. Who says that? Who looks at a peer-reviewed medical article and decides it's a marketing ploy for plastic manufacturers? It wasn't just about the hygiene anymore. It was about the fundamental way he processed information. It was about his refusal to accept a reality that didn't fit his immediate convenience. By the time I got to work a busy downtown cafe where I spend most of my shifts juggling espresso shots and demanding customers, I was exhausted. My head felt light and my patience was razor thin. Every time a customer complained about their foam or asked for a different milk, I wanted to scream, "At least you're not sharing a toothbrush with your mother." Around noon during my break, I sat in the cramped back room with a lukewarm croissant and checked my phone. There were no new messages from Leo. Usually he'd send me a good morning or a "hope work isn't too crazy" text by now. The silence was loud. I debated texting him, but what would I even say? Hey, still think the ADA is a front for a toothbrush cartel? Probably not the best way to mend things. I scrolled back through our older messages looking for signs that I had missed this side of him. We had been together for a year. He was the guy who brought me soup when I was sick. He was the guy who helped me move my heaviest boxes into this apartment. He was kind mostly. But as I look back, I started to see small cracks I had previously ignored. There was the time he dropped a piece of pizza on the dorm floor, a floor that hadn't been vacuumed in months, and just picked it up and ate it laughing when I winced. 5-second rule, Maya. The bacteria are still putting on their shoes. I had laughed then, thinking it was just guy humor. Then there was the time he confessed he hadn't changed his bedsheets in 6 weeks because he didn't have enough quarters for the laundry. I had made a face and he had promised to do it that weekend, which he did. I had seen these things as quirkiness as the typical messy college boy trope. I thought he just needed a little guidance, a little nudge toward adulthood. But the toothbrush thing? That was different. That wasn't just being messy. That was a total disregard for the basic boundaries of another person's body and space. And the conspiracy theory about the dental clinics? That was a disregard for logic itself. I finished my shift at 3 p.m., feeling like I had run a marathon. My plan for the afternoon was to go home, take a nap, and wait for Leo to come over so we could talk. He had said he'd see me after work, and despite the tension, I wanted to fix this. I wanted him to walk through the door, give me a hug, and say, "Hey, I'm sorry. I was tired and being an idiot. Of course I won't use your mom's toothbrush. That was a weird thing to suggest." If he said that I could move past it, we could laugh about it in a week. Remember that time you almost became a biological hazard? I could deal with an idiot. I wasn't sure if I could deal with someone who genuinely thought I was the one in the wrong. When I got back to the apartment, it was quiet and still. I took off my shoes and walked straight to the guest bathroom again. I don't know why. It was like a magnet. I stood there staring at the blue toothbrush. I felt like it was judging me. I eventually just took it out of the holder, put it in a Ziploc bag, and tucked it into the back of the medicine cabinet. I didn't want to look at it anymore. I didn't want the visual reminder of the argument. I fell into my bed and slept for 2 hours of deep, dreamless sleep that I desperately needed. When I woke up, the sun was beginning to set, casting long orange shadows across my bedroom wall. I checked my phone. One message from Leo, sent 10 minutes ago. "Hey, I'm downstairs. Buzz me in." My heart did a nervous little flip. This was it. The moment of truth. I smoothed my hair, took a deep breath, and pressed the buzzer. A few minutes later, I heard the elevator stop on my floor. I opened the front door and stood there trying to look neutral, not angry, but not entirely welcoming either. Leo walked down the hall, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked normal. He didn't look like someone who had been up all night stewing. He didn't look like someone who was about to apologize either. He looked like he was coming over to watch a movie and eat some popcorn. "Hey," he said, giving me a small tentative smile. "Hey," I replied, stepping back to let him in. He walked into the living room and dropped his bag on the sofa. "Long day." "Yeah," I said, leaning against the kitchen island. "Early starts are always rough. How was your day?" "Fine. Boring. Had a 3-hour lecture on macroeconomics that nearly killed me." He looked around the room, then back at me. The silence stretched out, becoming uncomfortable. "Look, Maya, about last night." I felt a spark of hope. "Yeah." "I think we both overreacted," he said, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I was tired and you were stressed about work. It was just a stupid argument. Let's just drop it. Okay." I felt the hope die, a quick, painful death. "Drop it," I asked, my voice flat. "Leo, you told me the American Dental Association is part of a conspiracy. You suggested using my mom's toothbrush while she's away. I don't think that's something we just drop." He groaned, throwing his head back. "Oh my God, Maya. Are we really doing this again? I was joking about the big dental thing. Mostly. I mean, come on, you have to admit they want you to spend money. But the point is, I didn't do it. I went home. I brushed my teeth with my own approved brush. No harm, no foul. But you wanted to, I said. You thought it was a reasonable thing to ask, and when I said it made me uncomfortable, you mocked me. You called me dramatic. You didn't respect my boundary, Leo. You fought me on it. He stepped closer, trying to put his hands on my shoulders, but I stepped back. His expression darkened. I fought you on it because you were being irrational. You were acting like I was trying to poison your family. It's a toothbrush, Maya. A tool. You're putting all this emotional weight on an object that doesn't matter. It's weird. Honestly, it's a little controlling. Controlling? I nearly choked on the word. It's controlling to want to keep my mother's personal items private. It's controlling to care about hygiene in my own home. It's controlling to make me feel like a disgusting leper because I didn't have a toothbrush and wanted to stay with my girlfriend, he shouted. We were standing in the middle of the kitchen, the beautiful, quiet apartment suddenly feeling very small and very loud. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw something I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just a difference of opinion. It was a complete lack of empathy for my perspective. He wasn't even trying to see why it bothered me. He was only focused on how my reaction had inconvenienced him. The word controlling hung in the air between us like a physical weight, cold and heavy. I felt a sudden sharp sting in my chest, a mixture of hurt and sheer, unadulterated disbelief. I looked at Leo standing there in my kitchen, a kitchen he didn't pay rent for in an apartment that wasn't even mine to give him full access to, and I realized how lopsided our dynamic had become. My mother had trusted me with this place, she had trusted me to maintain her home, her sanctuary, and her things. And here was my boyfriend, the person who claimed to love me, telling me that protecting her basic privacy and my own health was an act of control. Controlling. I repeated, my voice barely a whisper this time. The anger had momentarily drained out, replaced by a hollow sinking feeling. Leo, I am the one providing a roof over your head 3 or 4 nights a week. I am the one who makes sure there's food in the fridge and clean towels for you to use. I have never asked you for a dime. I have never told you who you can talk to or where you can go. But the one thing I asked, the one tiny microscopic boundary of please don't put my mother's used toothbrush in your mouth, and I'm the one who's controlling? Leo threw his hands up, pacing toward the window and back. See, this is exactly what I mean. You're bringing up the apartment and the food like you're keeping a scorecard. I didn't realize there were terms and conditions to hanging out with you. If I had known that my staying over was dependent on me following your weirdly specific hygiene manifestos, maybe I would have stayed at the dorm more often. It's not a manifesto, Leo. It's common sense. I stepped toward him, trying to catch his eye, but he was looking everywhere but at me. Do you honestly not see why it's a problem? It's not just about the bacteria, though. That's a huge part of it. It's about the fact that you feel entitled to anything in this apartment just because you're here. It's my mom's. She's a person, not a resource for you to use when you're too lazy to go back to your own place. He stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes narrowing. Lazy. You think I'm lazy because I wanted to spend time with you? Wow, that's great. I guess I'm just a lazy, unhygienic parasite in your eyes, right? I didn't say that. I said, though, a part of me was starting to wonder if it was true. I'm saying that you prioritize your own comfort over everything else. Over my sleep, over my mom's privacy, and over my feelings. When I told you it grossed me out, your first instinct wasn't to say, oh, sorry, I didn't realize. It was to tell me I was wrong. It was to tell me that my feelings weren't valid because of some big dental nonsense you pulled out of thin air. Leo let out a harsh, dry laugh. Oh, for the love of... You're still on that. I told you I was half joking about the articles. But you're so literal, Maya. You're so rigid. It's like you have this perfectly constructed little world, and the second anything slightly messy or unexpected happens, you have a total meltdown. I felt a tear prick the corner of my eye, but I brushed it away angrily. I didn't want him to see me cry. Not over this, not when I knew I was being reasonable. I'm not having a meltdown. I'm having a reaction to a person I care about showing a complete lack of basic respect. If you had just forgotten your toothbrush once and asked to use mine, and then accepted it when I said no, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. But you pushed. You suggested my mom's, and then you tried to make me feel stupid for knowing how science works. That's what this is about. It's about your reaction to me saying no. The silence that followed was different from the one before. It was more permanent. Leo looked at me, and for a second I thought I saw a flash of regret in his eyes. I thought maybe he was finally going to get it. He looked around the kitchen at the pristine counters, the carefully arranged spice rack, the stack of mail I had neatly sorted for my mom. Maybe you're right, he said softly. I felt a tiny spark of relief. You think so? Yeah, he said, nodding slowly. Maybe I do prioritize my comfort, but maybe that's because when I'm with someone I love, I expect to feel comfortable. I don't expect to feel like I'm walking through a minefield of boundaries and privacy. Every time I want to stay the night, if this is how it is over a toothbrush, Maya, what's it going to be like when we have a real problem? Are you going to cite articles at me every time we disagree on how to live our lives? If you're doing something that affects my health or my family's space, yes, I will. I couldn't believe he was trying to turn my use of facts into a character flaw. Since when is being informed and having standards a bad thing? Since when did loving someone mean you have to accept their gross habits without question? It doesn't, Leo said, his voice becoming dangerously calm, but it also shouldn't mean being lectured like a child. I'm 21 years old. I know how to take care of myself. I've survived this long without your mom's toothbrush, haven't I? The fact that you think I'm some kind of biological hazard is what hurts, Maya. It shows me what you really think of me. I stared at him, my mouth slightly open. The level of mental gymnastics he was performing was staggering. He had somehow managed to turn his suggestion of using an old borrowed toothbrush into a story about how I didn't value him as a person. It was a complete reversal of reality. Leo, I said, my voice trembling, I don't think you're a biological hazard. I think you're being incredibly stubborn and a little bit manipulative right now. You're trying to make me feel guilty for having a very normal reaction to something very weird. He grabbed his backpack from the sofa, the nylon fabric making a harsh scraping sound against the cushions. You know what, I'm done. I came over here to try and fix this, but you're just determined to be right. You'd rather be right than be happy. You'd rather have a clean guest bathroom than a boyfriend who wants to be near you. So fine. Enjoy your mom's apartment. Enjoy your sterile life. I'm going back to the dorms. Leo, wait, I started, but he was already halfway to the door. No, Maya, I'm tired. I'm tired of being the bad guy because I don't follow your rules. I'll text you when I've had some space. Or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just find someone who doesn't think a toothbrush is more important than a relationship. The door didn't slam this time. He closed it with a quiet, deliberate click that felt 1,000 times louder than a slam ever could. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, the evening light finally fading into a dull, flat blue. I felt sick. My stomach was in knots and my head was throbbing with the beginning of a massive tension headache. I walked over to the sofa and sat down in the spot where he had just been. It was still warm. I pulled a pillow onto my lap and hugged it tight, staring at the front door. Was he right? Was I being too rigid? I ran through the argument again, in my head, trying to find the place where I could have been softer, where I could have handled it better. But every time I got to the part about my mom's toothbrush, my stomach turned all over again. No, I wasn't wrong. I knew I wasn't wrong. It wasn't just about the brush. It was about the big dental comment. It was about him calling me controlling for saying no. It was about the way he moved from a joke to a conspiracy to a personal attack in the span of 24 hours. I reached for my phone, half expecting a sorry text, but there was nothing. I went to the guest bathroom, opened the medicine cabinet, and looked at the Ziploc bag where I had hidden the blue and white toothbrush. I felt like I was looking at evidence in a crime scene. I took the bag out, walked to the kitchen, and threw it directly into the trash can. I didn't want it in the house anymore. It felt tainted. As I stood there by the bin, I realized that I wasn't just throwing away a toothbrush. I was looking at the debris of my relationship. I had spent a year building something with Leo, and it was currently being dismantled by a piece of plastic, and a fundamental difference in how we viewed the world. I wondered what my mom would say. She's a strong woman, a woman who doesn't take nonsense from anyone. I could almost hear her voice in my head. Maya, if he doesn't respect your home, he doesn't respect you. Is it really that simple? Can a relationship really end over something so small, or was the toothbrush just the tip of an iceberg I hadn't seen coming? The silence that followed Leo's departure wasn't the peaceful, restorative quiet I usually craved. It was a jagged, heavy silence that seemed to press against my eardrums. I sat on the edge of the sofa, my hands tucked under my thighs to stop them from shaking. The apartment, which had always felt like my safe haven, suddenly felt like a stage where a very ugly play had just ended. I looked at the spot on the floor where he had stood while calling me controlling, and I felt a wave of coldness wash over me. How did we get here? How did a year of movie nights, shared dreams, and whispered secrets get reduced to a shouting match over a blue and white piece of plastic? I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, but my chest felt tight like someone had wrapped a heavy chain around my ribs. I kept replaying his words in my head. Big dental, controlling, sterile. Each word felt like a little dart thrown at the person I thought I was. I've always been the responsible one. In my group of friends, I'm the one who carries extra napkins, the one who remembers to check the bus schedule, the one who makes sure everyone gets home safe. I thought Leo liked that about me. He used to call me his grounding wire. He'd say he loved how I had my life together because his own was often a bit of a whirlwind. But tonight that same quality was being weaponized against me. Tonight, being responsible meant I was rigid. Being clean meant I was brainwashed. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, needing to do something with my hands. I started wiping down the counters, even though they were already spotless. It's a nervous habit, cleaning as a way to process chaos. As I scrubbed at a non-existent spot of grease, I found myself thinking about the big dental comment again. At first, it had seemed like a stupid heat-of-the-moment joke, but the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. It wasn't just a joke. It was a window into how he viewed the world. If he could dismiss the basic health advice of the entire medical community as a corporate conspiracy just because it was inconvenient for him to go back to his dorm, what else did he believe? What other truths was he ignoring? It felt like a crack in the foundation of his character. I thought about all the times we talked about the future. We talked about traveling, maybe moving in together after graduation, even having a dog. But as I stood there in the quiet kitchen, I had a terrifying thought. What would it be like to raise a child with someone who thinks hygiene is a scam? I know. I'm jumping ahead. I'm catastrophizing. But that's what happens when the person you trust most in the world looks at you like you're the enemy for having a basic boundary. I finally stopped scrubbing and leaned against the counter, my head in my hands. I felt so alone. Living in my mom's apartment was a privilege, but tonight it felt like a gilded cage. I wanted to call her. I wanted to hear her voice and tell her everything. But I couldn't. How could I tell my mom that the guy she'd welcomed into her home, the guy she'd let sleep on her guest bed and eat at her table, had suggested using her toothbrush because he was too lazy to leave? She would be horrified. She would tell me to change the locks. And a part of me, a growing loud part of me, knew she'd be right. I needed a second opinion. I needed someone who wasn't involved to tell me if I was actually the crazy one. I grabbed my phone and opened Reddit. I've always been a lurker, someone who reads the drama but never participates. But tonight, I needed the void to talk back. I typed out the story, my thumbs flying across the screen. I detailed the argument, the toothbrush, the bacteria articles, and the big dental comment. I hit post and sat back watching the little loading icon spin. Within minutes, the notifications started rolling in. NTA, not the asshole, the first comment read. That is absolutely disgusting. Who even thinks like that? Red flag girl. Run said another. It starts with a toothbrush and ends with him not respecting any of your boundaries. The big dental thing is a sign of a much deeper problem with logic and reality. Wait, he wanted to use your mom's, not even yours. That's a whole other level of weird. That's her personal DNA. Gross. I read through dozens of comments, and with every one the weight on my chest lifted. Just a little bit. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being dramatic. Total strangers from all over the world were confirming what my gut had been telling me all along. This wasn't normal. But then my phone buzzed with a direct message. My heart skipped a beat thinking it was Leo. But it wasn't. It was an anonymous user who had read my post. Hey OP, the message read. I went through something similar with an ex. It started with little things. He'd use my razor without asking to eat food I'd specifically bought for work, things like that. He always made me feel like I was the uptight one for caring. It took me 3 years to realize that it wasn't about the items. It was about the fact that he didn't see me as a separate person with my own rights. He saw everything of mine as ours, but everything of his as his. Be careful. The big dental stuff sounds like he's leaning into some weird anti-science rabbit holes. I stared at the message for a long time. He didn't see me as a separate person? That hit me harder than any of the gross comments. It explained why he felt entitled to stay over when I had work. It explained why he felt entitled to use my mom's things. To Leo, the world was a buffet, and he was the only one with a plate. I was about to put my phone down and try to get some actual sleep when another notification popped up. This one wasn't from Reddit. It was a text from Leo. My breath hitched. Was it an apology? Was he at his dorm realizing how ridiculous he'd been? I opened the message. It was a link. No text, just a link to a YouTube video. I clicked it, my hands trembling. The video was titled The Hidden Dangers of Fluoride and the Great Dental Scam. It was a 20-minute long conspiracy video featuring a guy in a basement talking about how the government uses dental hygiene to pacify the masses. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He wasn't backing down, he wasn't sorry. He was doubled down deeper than ever. He was trying to educate me. He was trying to prove that his desire to use a dirty toothbrush was actually a revolutionary act of defiance against a corrupt system. I didn't reply. I couldn't. There were no words for this level of absurdity. I blocked his number just for the night I told myself and walked into my bedroom. I checked the door lock 3 times. I checked the window locks. I felt like I was being hunted by a version of my boyfriend I didn't recognize. As I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling, I realized that the man I had been dating for a year might never have existed at all. Or maybe he did, but he was hidden behind a mask of normalcy that had finally slipped over something as small as a toothbrush. The next morning, the sun rose just as it always did, but the apartment felt different. It felt emptier, but also cleaner. I made my coffee, did my morning routine, and went to work. I didn't unblock him. I didn't check Reddit. I just existed in the quiet reality of my own life. But I knew this wasn't over. Leo had a key to the apartment. My mom had given me permission to give him one for emergencies, and I had never thought twice about it. Now the thought of him having access to this space, my mom's space, made my stomach turn. I spent my entire shift at the cafe thinking about that key. I thought about him walking in while I was at work. I thought about him in the guest bathroom. I thought about him standing up to Big Dental in my mother's home. By the time I clocked out, I knew what I had to do. It felt drastic. It felt like a meltdown, as Leo would call it, but I didn't care anymore. I wasn't playing by his rules of what was normal. The walk home from the cafe usually took me 15 minutes. It was a route I knew by heart, past the bookstore with the sleepy cat and the window across the park where the old men played chess, and down the narrow alley that served as a shortcut to my street. But today, every shadow seemed longer. Every footstep behind me sounded like a threat. I kept clutching my bag, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of my own keys. The thought of Leo having a duplicate set of him, being able to slide into my life whenever he pleased, made me feel physically exposed. I had given him that key 6 months ago. It had felt like a milestone at the time, a symbol of trust and a step toward something more permanent. Just for emergencies, I'd said, though we both knew it was mostly so he could drop off his bag before I got home from work. My mom had been hesitant when I told her, but she eventually agreed, saying she trusted my judgment. That thought stung the most now. My judgment had been flawed. I had invited a man into her private sanctuary who didn't even respect the most basic rules of hygiene, let alone the sanctity of her belongings. As soon as I reached the heavy glass doors of the apartment building, I didn't head for the elevator. Instead, I ducked into the super's office. Mr. Henderson was a kind, silver-haired man who had known my mother for 20 years. He looked up from his ledger, his glasses sliding down his nose. "Afternoon, Maya. Everything okay? You look a bit peaked." "Hi, Mr. Henderson. Actually, I lost my keys today." I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I'm really worried about someone finding them. Is there any way we can get the locks changed? Today, I'll pay whatever the emergency fee is." Mr. Henderson frowned, his paternal instincts kicking in. "Lost him, eh? That's a bit of a worry. I've got a locksmith who does the whole building. Let me see if he's around. You go and lock the deadbolt from the inside, and I'll send him up as soon as he answers his page." "Thank you," I whispered, feeling a wave of relief so intense it made my knees weak. "Truly thank you." I retreated to the apartment and did exactly as he said. I slid the deadbolt into place and leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. I stayed there for a long time, listening to the muffled sounds of the hallway. Every time the elevator chimed, my heart leapt into my throat. Was it Leo? Was he coming back to finish the argument? Or was he coming back to prove his love by ignoring my request for space? The locksmith arrived 45 minutes later. He was a man of few words, which I appreciated. He set to work, immediately the rhythmic clack-clack of his tools echoing through the quiet foyer. I stood in the kitchen, nursing a glass of water, watching him through the doorway. It felt like he was performing surgery on my life, cutting away the part that was vulnerable to Leo's intrusion. "There you go, miss," he said, handing me a ring with 3 shiny silver keys. "All new cylinders. The old ones are in this bag. You might want to hold on to them for the landlord." I thanked him, paid the staggering fee without a second thought, and closed the door. I tested the new key. It slid in with a satisfying, oily smoothness. Click, locked. Click, unlocked. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt like I could actually breathe. I spent the next hour gathering Leo's things. It was a strange, hollow task. I found a stray hoodie draped over the back of the guest room chair. I found his phone charger, plugged in behind the sofa. I found a half-empty bag of his favorite pretzels in the pantry. And then there was the bathroom. I went into the guest bathroom and looked at the space where his toiletries used to sit next to mine. I grabbed his deodorant, his hair gel, and his ironically spare razor. I put everything into a sturdy cardboard box I found in the hall closet. I didn't want to be cruel, but I couldn't have these pieces of him scattered around my home anymore. They felt like anchors, pulling me back into a relationship that was rapidly revealing itself to be a sinking ship. Just as I was taping the box shut, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I hesitated, then picked it up. I had unblocked him. I needed to know if he was coming over. "Maya, I'm sorry for the video," the text read. "I was just frustrated. I love you and I don't want to fight about stupid stuff anymore. I'm coming over in 20 minutes. Let's just order a pizza and forget this whole weekend happened. I've got a surprise for you." My stomach did a slow, nauseating roll. Forget it happened. That was his solution. No apology for the big dental nonsense, no acknowledgement of the boundary he'd tried to shatter, and certainly no understanding of why I was upset. Just a pizza and a surprise. To Leo, my feelings were a temporary storm that could be weathered with enough pepperoni and a distracting gift. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Instead, I dragged the box of his belongings out to the hallway and set it neatly beside the elevator. I didn't want him in the apartment. I didn't want to have to look at him while he tried to charm his way back into my good graces. 10 minutes later, the elevator chimed. I stood back from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Through the peephole, I saw the top of Leo's head. He looked happy. He was carrying a small bouquet of daisies, my favorite, and a box from the local pizza place. He looked like the perfect boyfriend. I watched as he reached into his pocket and pulled out his key. He slid it into the lock with a confident flourish. I heard the metal scrape. I heard him wiggle the key. Scritch, scritch, scritch. He stopped, frowned, and tried again. He used more force this time. The sound of the key grinding against the new pins vibrating through the door and into my very bones. He leaned his shoulder against the door, trying to force the turn. "Maya!" He called out, his voice muffled but clearly confused. "Hey babe, I think something's wrong with the lock. It's stuck." I stayed silent. I felt like a ghost in my own home, watching the world through a tiny glass lens. "Maya!" He called again, louder this time, followed by a sharp knock. "Are you in there? The key isn't working. Did you put the deadbolt on open up? I've got dinner." I took a deep breath, stepped closer to the door, and spoke through the wood. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, low, steady, and entirely devoid of the drama he had accused me of. "The locks have been changed, Leo." There was a long, dead silence on the other side of the door. I could almost feel his brain stalling, trying to process the information. "What?" he finally said, his voice dropping an octave. "What do you mean, changed? Why would you do that?" "You know why," I said. "I asked for space, and you responded by sending me conspiracy theories and telling me you were coming over anyway. You don't respect my boundaries, and you don't respect this home. I can't let you have a key anymore." "Maya, open the door," he said, his tone shifting from confusion to that familiar simmering annoyance. "This is insane. You're being insane. I bought you flowers. I have pizza. We're supposed to talk this out, not lock me out like a criminal. Open the door right now." "No," I said, and the word felt like a shield. "Your things are in a box by the elevator. Take them, Leo. Take the pizza and the flowers and go back to your dorm. I need time to think, and I can't do that with you trying to force your way back in." "Force my way in?" he yelled, and I heard the pizza box hit the floor with a dull thud. I live here half the week. This is my home too. You can't just change the locks on me because you're mad about a toothbrush. That's illegal. Maya, I'll call the cops. It's not your home, Leo, I said, my voice trembling slightly but holding firm. It's my mother's apartment. You don't pay rent. You aren't on the lease. You were a guest, and right now you're an unwelcome one. Please just go. I heard him kick the door not hard, but a sharp thwack that made me flinch. You're crazy. You're actually losing it over a toothbrush. Are you serious right now? You're throwing away a year of us because of a piece of plastic. It's not the toothbrush, Leo, I shouted back, the frustration finally bubbling over. It's the fact that you think you get to decide what's important to me. It's the fact that you think my mother's privacy doesn't matter. It's the fact that you called me controlling for having a single boundary. Go away. Just go away. I heard him pacing in the hallway, his heavy footsteps echoing. He was muttering to himself words I couldn't quite catch, but that sounded dark and jagged. I moved away from the door and sat on the floor of the hallway, pulling my knees to my chest. I waited. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the elevator chime again. I waited another minute, then crept back to the peephole. The hallway was empty. The daisies were lying on the floor, their white petals already starting to bruise. The pizza box was gone, and so was the box of his belongings. He was gone. I slumped against the wall, a sob finally breaking free from my throat. I wasn't happy. I didn't feel victorious. I felt broken. I felt like I had just cut off a limb to save the rest of my body. I looked at the new silver key sitting on the hallway table, shining under the overhead light. It was just a piece of metal. It was just a tool. But as I sat there in the silence of my mother's clean, quiet apartment, I realized it was the only thing standing between me and a person who didn't know where he ended and I began. The silence that filled the apartment after the elevator doors closed was absolute. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a quiet evening. It was the ringing, hollow silence that follows a grenade blast. I stayed on the floor, my back against the cold wood of the front door, staring at the far wall. My breathing was shallow, and my heart was still thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I felt like I had just survived a physical confrontation, even though there had been a thick slab of oak between us the entire time. Eventually, I reached out and picked up the daisies he'd left behind. They were crushed. The white petals were streaked with green from where they'd been stepped on or dropped. I looked at them for a long time, thinking about the irony. A bouquet of flowers, a traditional symbol of love and apology, paired with a refusal to listen to a single word I'd said. It was the perfect metaphor for our relationship. He wanted the aesthetics of being a good boyfriend without doing any of the actual work of respecting me as an individual. I walked to the kitchen and dropped the flowers into the trash right on top of the Ziploc bag containing my mother's toothbrush. My phone started buzzing again. I didn't even have to look at it to know it was him. Then it buzzed again, and again. The notifications were coming in a relentless stream. I finally picked it up expecting a barrage of insults or more conspiracy videos. Instead, I saw a wall of text that made my stomach churn. Maya, please. I'm sitting in my car and I'm shaking. I can't believe you did this. I thought we were building a life together. How can you throw away a year of memories because I made a joke about a toothbrush? It was a joke. I was trying to lighten the mood because you were being so tense. I didn't mean any of that big dental stuff. I was just trying to show you how silly it is to get so upset over a piece of plastic. Please, just talk to me. I'm sorry I yelled. I just feel so rejected right now. I thought you were my person. The "I thought you were my person" line hit me like a physical blow. It was a classic move, one I'd seen him use before when we had smaller disagreements. He would pivot from being the aggressor to being the victim in the span of a single sentence. He would use my own empathy against me, making me feel like I was the one who was being cruel, the one who was giving up on the relationship. For a split second, I felt that familiar tug of guilt. Maybe I was too harsh, I thought. Maybe changing the locks was an overreaction. He's just a guy who's a bit messy and has some weird ideas. Is that really worth a breakup? But then I looked at the guest bathroom door. I remembered the look on his face when he suggested using my mother's toothbrush. It wasn't just a joke. I knew it wasn't. It was a test. He was testing to see how much of my reality he could rewrite. He was testing to see if his comfort could override my boundaries. And when I stood my ground, he didn't just disagree. He tried to gaslight me into believing that basic hygiene was a corporate lie. I didn't reply to his text. I knew that any response, even a "leave me alone," would be seen as an opening. It would be an invitation for another hour of circular logic and emotional manipulation. Instead, I opened my laptop and went back to the Reddit thread I'd posted earlier. The comments had exploded. What had started as a few dozen people calling him gross had turned into a massive discussion about weaponized incompetence and boundary stomping. OP listened to me. One comment read, highlighted by dozens of upvotes: "The toothbrush isn't the problem. The problem is that he doesn't believe your no is a complete sentence. He sees your boundaries as obstacles to be negotiated or mocked. Changing the locks was the smartest thing you could have done. Do not let him back in. People like this don't change because they don't think they've done anything wrong." Another user added, "The big dental thing is the scariest part. It shows he's willing to reject objective reality to protect his ego. If he can't admit he's wrong about a toothbrush, imagine what he'll be like when you have a disagreement about finances or health or children. Run? I sat there in the glow of the screen, reading the words of strangers who seemed to understand my situation better than I did 24 hours ago. It's a strange feeling when the internet confirms your worst fears. You want them to tell you you're overreacting. You want them to say, oh, he's just a dummy, give him another chance. But deep down, I knew they were right. The toothbrush was just the catalyst, the reaction. His refusal to apologize, his mockery, his entitlement, that was the real story. I spent the rest of the night in a state of hypervigilance. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren, every muffled conversation from the hallway made me jump. I kept checking the deadbolt. I even pushed a heavy chair in front of the door, knowing it wouldn't actually stop someone with a key, but needing the physical barrier for my own peace of mind. I didn't sleep much. When I did, I had feverish dreams about blue and white bristles growing like vines over the walls of the apartment, choking the life out of everything. I woke up at 4 a.m., my heart racing, the silence of the city outside feeling oppressive. I realized then that I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't be a prisoner in my own home waiting for the next text, the next surprise visit, the next conspiracy video. I needed to end it truly and finally. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, the first light of dawn beginning to filter through the windows. I pulled out my phone and unblocked Leo one last time. I didn't want to leave things in a state of maybe. I needed to close the door. Leo, I type my fingers steady now. We are over. This isn't just about a toothbrush, and it's not about me being rigid. It's about the fact that you don't respect my boundaries or my home. Calling me controlling for asking you to respect my mother's privacy was the end for me. Changing the locks was necessary because I no longer feel safe or comfortable sharing my space with you. Please do not come to the apartment again. Do not contact my friends or my mother. I will be sending the rest of your things, whatever was left in the hallway, to your dorm via a courier today. I wish you the best, but we are done. I hit send and immediately blocked him again. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't want to see the typing in bubbles. I didn't want to hear the excuses. I felt a strange sense of lightness. It was a sad lightness, like a balloon that's lost most of its helium but is still drifting upward. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The city was waking up. People were walking their dogs, heading to early shifts, starting their lives. And for the first time in a year, I was starting mine without the weight of Leo's expectations. I realized then that being particular or conscious of bacteria wasn't a flaw. It was a part of who I was. I liked my clean apartment. I liked my boundaries. I liked the fact that I cared about my mother's things. Those weren't things I needed to loosen up about. They were values that the right person would respect without question. Later that afternoon, I called my mom. I didn't tell her everything. I didn't want to gross her out with the toothbrush details just yet, but I told her that Leo and I had broken up and that I'd changed the locks for safety reasons. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I'll never forget. Maya, your home is where you're supposed to feel the most like yourself. If someone makes you feel like you have to defend your own space, they don't belong there. I'm proud of you. I hung up the phone and cried, but they were good tears. They were the kind of tears that wash away the grit and leave you feeling clear. As I look back on the toothbrush incident, I realize how lucky I was. It was such a small thing, such a seemingly minor disagreement. But it was the thread that when pulled unraveled the whole sweater. It saved me from years of being gaslit, years of having my boundaries eroded, years of being told that my common sense was a conspiracy. Sometimes the universe sends you a warning in the form of a blue and white Reach toothbrush. And the best thing you can do is listen. The days that followed were a blur of nervous energy and a strange, hollow kind of silence. I had hired a local courier service to take the box of Leo's things, the clothes, the chargers, the half-eaten snacks, and deliver them directly to his dorm's front desk. I didn't want to see him. I didn't want a final talk. I didn't want to give him one last chance to look me in the eye and tell me I was the problem. I watched the tracking information on my phone like it was a high-stakes thriller. When the notification finally popped up, delivered. Signed for by front desk, I felt a physical weight lift off my shoulders. It was the last tether, the last physical piece of him in my life. Or so I thought. Breaking up with someone you've shared a year of your life with is never just about the two of you. It's like a stone thrown into a pond. The ripples hit everyone you know. Within 48 hours of the lockout, my phone started buzzing with messages from people I hadn't talked to in months. Mutual friends, acquaintances from university, even Leo's roommate. It turned out that Leo wasn't just sitting in his dorm room, reflecting on his hygiene habits. He was on a full-scale campaign to rewrite the narrative of our breakup. Hey Maya, is everything okay? One friend texted. Leo said you had some kind of breakdown over a toothbrush and kicked him out. He sounds really worried about your mental health. Another message from a girl in my biology lab read, OMG, I just heard about you and Leo. Is it true you changed the locks because he didn't use the right brand of toothpaste? That seems a bit much, doesn't it? I sat on my bed, staring at these messages with a mixture of fury and absolute exhaustion. He was doing exactly what I feared. He was taking the most ridiculous surface-level detail of our argument and using it to make me look like a crazy germaphobe. He was leaving out the part where he wanted to use my mother's used toothbrush. He was leaving out the big dental conspiracy theories. He was leaving out the fact that he called me controlling for having a single boundary. In his version of the story, I was a high-strung, irrational woman who had snapped over a piece of plastic. It's a very specific kind of pain when someone you loved uses your own personality traits against you. He knew I was organized. He knew I cared about health and science. So he took those traits and twisted them into a caricature of a mental health crisis. It was a classic smear campaign. And for a few hours, I felt myself slipping back into that defensive, desperate state. I wanted to call everyone. I wanted to send them the screenshots of the big dental video. I wanted to explain the science of periodontal disease and the ethics of guest-host relationships. But then I stopped. I looked at the typing bubbles on my screen, and I realized, if they believe him, they aren't my friends. If people who have known me for years truly think I would throw away a relationship over a brand of toothpaste, then they don't know me at all. And more importantly, I realized that Leo's frantic need to talk to everyone we knew was just another form of the same entitlement he'd shown in my kitchen. He felt entitled to my reputation just as much as he felt entitled to my mother's toothbrush. I decided not to engage. To the friends who reached out with genuine concern, I said, Leo and I had a fundamental disagreement about boundaries and respect. It wasn't just about a toothbrush, but that was the final straw. I'm doing okay, and I'd appreciate it if we didn't talk about him for a while. To the ones who were just looking for gossip, I didn't reply at all. However, the extinction burst, that final desperate surge of behavior when a person realizes their old tactics aren't working, wasn't over. Since I had blocked him on every social media platform and my phone, Leo turned to the one place he knew I couldn't easily ignore: my email. The first email arrived on Tuesday afternoon. The subject line was simply, "Please read this." I opened it, my heart pounding. It was a 3-page single-space manifesto. It started with an apology, the kind of non-apology that makes you want to scream. "I'm sorry if I made you feel uncomfortable," he wrote, "but you have to understand that I was just trying to be close to you. I don't think you realize how much your obsession with cleanliness pushes people away. I've been reading a lot about OCD and germophobia, and I think you really need help, Maya. I'm only saying this because I love you." He then pivoted back into the conspiracy stuff as if he couldn't help himself. About the dental thing, "I know you think I'm crazy, but I found this other forum where people talk about how the ADA is funded by the same companies that make the brushes. It's all a cycle of consumption. I was just trying to protect us from being part of that cycle. Is that really so wrong?" He ended the email by telling me that he would always be there when I decided to get better, and that he had kept a spare key to my heart even if I'd changed the locks to the apartment. I read the email twice, then I deleted it, then I went into my trash folder and deleted it permanently. I didn't want those words sitting in my digital space any more than I wanted his body in my physical space. It was the same pattern and insult wrapped in concern, followed by a refusal to accept reality, ending with a romanticized version of himself as the patient-loving boyfriend. I spent the rest of the week trying to reclaim my life. I went to work, I studied at the library, and I even went out for coffee with a friend who had actually stood up for me when Leo started his smear campaign. Slowly, the crazy label started to peel off. People who actually saw me, who actually talked to me, realized that I was the same Maya I'd always been. I wasn't having a breakdown, I was having a breakthrough. But there was still a lingering sense of anxiety. I started taking the long way home from work, avoiding the street where the pizza place was. I found myself scanning the crowds at the university, my stomach dropping every time I saw a guy with a similar build or a similar jacket. I realized that the toothbrush incident hadn't just ended a relationship, it had damaged my sense of safety. One afternoon, I was sitting in a park near the apartment trying to read a book for my ethics class. It was a beautiful day, the sun filtering through the trees, the sound of kids playing in the distance. For a moment, I actually felt peaceful. And then I saw him. Leo was sitting on a bench about 50 yards away. He wasn't looking at me. He was just staring at his phone, a frown etched onto his face. He looked different than he did in my memories. He looked smaller. He looked like just another guy in a park, not the looming, logic-defying presence that had dominated my thoughts for the last week. I felt a sudden, sharp instinct to get up and run, but I stayed. I forced myself to sit there and breathe. I looked at him and I thought about the big dental comment. I thought about him calling me controlling. I thought about the blue and white toothbrush. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel scared. I felt a profound sense of pity. Here was a man who would rather lose a girl who loved him, a girl who provided him with a home food and companionship, than admit that he should probably buy his own toothbrush. He was a person so trapped in his own ego, so unwilling to accept a no, that he had burned his own life down to avoid being wrong. He looked up then, and our eyes met. I didn't look away, I didn't smile, and I didn't scowl. I just looked at him with the neutral, distant curiosity you might have for a strange bug you found in your house. He froze. He half stood up as if he were going to come over, but then he saw the look on my face. He saw that the hook was gone. He saw that there was no more guilt for him to mine, no more empathy for him to exploit. He sat back down, looked at his feet, and after a few seconds, he got up and walked in the opposite direction. I sat there for a long time after he was gone, the sun still warm on my shoulders. I realized then that the locks on the door were just the beginning. The real lock was the one I'd placed on my own heart, not to keep people out, but to make sure that only people who knew how to respect a home were allowed inside. The confrontation in the park felt like the final exhale of a long, suffocating breath. Seeing Leo not as a villain, but as a small, stubborn man who had chosen a toothbrush over a relationship changed something fundamental inside me. The fear that had been prickling at the back of my neck for days began to dissolve, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I walked back to my mother's apartment, my home, and for the first time since that Friday night, I didn't check over my shoulder. I didn't fumble with my keys. I just walked in, locked the door, and leaned against it, listening to the silence. It's funny how silence can change its texture. A week ago, this silence felt lonely. Then it felt heavy with the threat of an intruder. Now it felt like a clean slate. I looked around the living room at the sunbeams dancing on the hardwood floors, and I realized I needed to do one more thing to truly move on. I needed to understand how I had let someone like Leo into my life in the first place. How does a girl who prides herself on logic and boundaries end up dating a man who thinks the American Dental Association is a shadow government? I spent that evening going through old journals and looking at photos on my phone. In the beginning, Leo had been everything I thought I wanted. He was spontaneous where I was rigid. He was loud where I was quiet. I had mistaken his lack of boundaries for freedom, and his messiness for authenticity. When he would eat food off the floor or forget to wash his hands, I had laughed it off as boyish charm. I had prioritized his comfort over my own instincts so many times that by the time we reached the toothbrush incident, I had already trained myself to say yes when my brain was screaming no. I realized then that the toothbrush wasn't the first red flag. It was just the first one I couldn't ignore. It was the one that finally hit a nerve so deep that my self-preservation kicked in. It was a lesson in the slow boil, how you can slowly lose yourself in a relationship until you don't even recognize the person looking back at you in the mirror. I decided to do a deep clean of the apartment, not because it was dirty. I had already scrubbed every surface twice, but because I wanted to reclaim the space. I moved the furniture slightly, changing the flow of the room so it didn't look like it did when he lived here. I bought a new set of towels in a color he would have hated. I bought a brand new toothbrush for the guest bathroom, not because I expected guests, but as a symbolic gesture that the space was protected. While I was vacuuming behind the guest room bed, I found one last item. It was a small crumpled piece of paper. I smoothed it out thinking it might be a receipt or a note. It was a handwritten list Leo must have made months ago. It was titled Maya's Rules. Underneath in his messy looping scrawl were things like don't leave shoes in the hallway, rinse the sink after shaving, wash hands before dinner, don't touch the mom's stuff. Next to several of the items he had drawn little frowny faces or question marks, seeing that list made my blood run cold. He hadn't seen my rules as basic hygiene or respect for my mother's home. He had seen them as a chore list, a set of hurdles he had to jump over to keep me happy. He had been performing respect while harboring a deep-seated resentment for the very boundaries that kept the apartment and me functioning. The toothbrush argument wasn't a sudden lapse in judgment. It was the moment he finally decided he was tired of performing. I threw the list into the trash and felt a wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy. I wasn't the controlling one. I was the one trying to maintain a baseline of decency with a man who felt entitled to ignore it. A few days later, my mom called me. She was coming home a week early. Usually this would have made me nervous. I'd be rushing around trying to make sure everything was perfect. But this time I felt ready. When she walked through the door, she dropped her bags and looked at me, then looked at the apartment. It looks different in here, she said, her eyes scanning the rearranged living room. Lighter. It feels lighter, I said, giving her a hug. That night we sat on the balcony with glasses of wine watching the city lights. I finally told her the whole story, the toothbrush, the big dental comment, the locks, the park. I expected her to be angry about the key or grossed out by the suggestion, but she just listened quietly. When I finished, she reached over and squeezed my hand. Maya, she said, the world is full of people who will try to convince you that your standards are too high just because they aren't willing to meet them. Don't ever lower them. If a man thinks a toothbrush is a hill to die on, let him die on it. You deserve someone who brings their own toothbrush and asks before they open your fridge. We laughed then, a real belly-shaking laugh that echoed over the balcony railing. It was the sound of a chapter closing. Looking back on it now, I'm actually grateful for that argument. It was the most absurd, disgusting, and frustrating experience of my life, but it was also the most clarifying. It taught me that my particulars are actually my strengths. They are the gatekeepers of my peace. They are the things that ensure my home remains a sanctuary and my life remains my own. So if you're out there wondering if you're being too much for asking for basic respect or for having a boundary that someone else thinks is dramatic, just remember my story. Trust your gut. If something feels gross, it's probably gross. If someone calls you controlling for saying no, they're usually the ones trying to control you. And for heaven's sake, never share a toothbrush with someone who thinks the ADA is a conspiracy. I'd love to know what you guys think. Have you ever had a partner who tried to gaslight you over something small? Or have you ever had a toothbrush moment where the scales finally fell from your eyes? Sometimes it's the smallest things that reveal the biggest truths about the people we're with. Let me know your stories in the comments, and if you enjoyed this journey of reclaiming my space, don't forget to subscribe for more stories about setting boundaries and finding your own voice. Your support means the world to me and helps me keep sharing these real-life lessons. The apartment is quiet tonight, but it's a good quiet. I'm going to go brush my teeth with my own brush in my own sink, and then I'm going to sleep a long, sterile, and perfectly peaceful sleep.